7 during 2021, and we approved 96 of those 97. So I just want to thank you for your support, and thank you for providing us with a super fantastic staff to work with. They are very competent and efficient, and they make our job easy. Can I answer any questions for you?
Ms. Bear, I do have a question. I had a citizen inquire, how are locations chosen for designation, historic designations and things like that?
You mean for being like a
landmark, yes.
Landmark? Mm-hmm. There's an application that you fill out.
Okay, is that online?
And is that online now? You come up. Okay. So I told you, we've got smart staff.
So preservation there's multiple types of designation. So
Okay.
National Register, which Khaki meant, that's kind of your honor roll nationally, which you've seen, you've been someplace and seen in here. And that is done through the state office, so the State Historic Preservation Office, and you would need to contact them. Local landmarking is that designation where they do have to be reviewed, the building, but there's up to a 50% tax deferral. And they need to contact staff first, because we like to go over that process and what it takes, how long it takes, and it's a pretty in-depth application that they have to submit for that. So we're here, they can call us anytime, and we'd be more than happy to talk to them about that.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I have a question.
Okay. Maybe I can answer this one.
Yeah, the historic Bethesda Park, the historic structure report, is this a report that's done on every so many year basis, or is this a report that we haven't had before?
It's a report that hasn't been done before, so they've hired a consultant from Walter Robs to do a historic structures report to basically look at what do the structures need going forward. Can we create an accessibility and a long-term maintenance plan so that they can do a better job taking care of them, because some of them have some deferred maintenance, but so this has not been done before. This is new.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other questions I can't answer? Okay, thank you so much
You're
for your
very
time.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your service. Mr. Chairman of the Board, the second item on the agenda today is a presentation of the Community Appearance Commission annual report, and we have the chair of the Community Appearance Commission, Anton Musoff, who's here, who will present the Commission's 2021 annual report to the board as well.
Hello. So nice to be without and speaking without the mask. My name is Anton Musoff, and I'm the chair of the Community Appearance Committee. I'm a Russian Native American that had an honor to become a citizen at Old Salem naturalization ceremony in 2017, and I was invited as a keynote speaker the following year. I live in Winston for the last 16 years. I'm a realtor, and I love my city, and this is my home. This past year witnessed and continued effects of the ongoing COVID pandemic, which has left an incredible mark on our community. The Community Appearance Commission has largely been able to adapt its work to life during the pandemic, with all of the Commission's meetings this year being held virtually. Unfortunately, Community Roots Day was canceled for the second consecutive year due to safety concern related to the pandemic, holding this event during the pandemic. It is our hope that we are able to hold the Community Roots Day again this fall, 2022. The Commission was able to continue with one of its core responsibilities of reviewing and providing design input for publicly funded projects. In 2021, the Commission reviewed renovations for a school, recreation center, park, and proposed board storage building at Salem Lake Marina. The CEC is also looking forward to sponsoring and organizing the next biennial Community Appearance Award program in the spring of 2023. We appreciate the ongoing support of the City of Winston-Salem Council, Forsyth County Board of Commissioners, and the City County Planning Board. Thank you. We're hoping that 2022 will be a productive year for the CAC as it continues to work to improve the visual character and aesthetic quality of Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. We're very excited being completely returned to our in-person commissions meeting and activities. This year, we are very excited to partner with Creative Corridor Coalition. They are working hard and diligent to make our city beautiful, green, artful, and iconic. Some of the current and future projects include Welcome Signage for our city, Peter Oliver Cultural Site, Martin Luther King Drive Streetscape, and more. As always, our members and I welcome suggestions for programs and potential partnerships that we can undertake to better serve the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you again for your service. Mr. Chairman of the board, the third item on the agenda is actually mine, and it was a request that came up at the planning board meeting in April, earlier this month, dealing with just a generalized discussion of uses allowed in agricultural zoning, and uses allowed in conjunction with Bonafide farms. So in front of you, I provided, I knew there was something that was missing. I finally found it this afternoon. So there are two different things that are laying in front of you. There's a packet that's stapled together that talks about agricultural uses out of the general statutes, and there's a separate piece of paper that has agriculture defined. Agriculture is one of those things, especially whenever you're looking at agritourism and kind of like the value-added provisions, that is, you kind of know it when you see it, but there's no easy way to define what is and isn't agritourism. If you read the definition on the package that's stapled together, agricultural uses, bona fide farming exempt from county regulations, it says county zoning regulations may not affect property use for bona fide farm purposes. And then, it kind of goes on to define what bona fide farm purposes are, but then it actually provides a separate definition under GS 106-581.1, which is the separate piece of paper that I provided you. But it goes on in here and it tells you how you qualify as a bona fide farm, and there are 4 different verifications that we have. And in the packet, it actually has something that we have on our website where we guide folks that think that they are a bona fide farm. They can provide one of those 4 pieces of information to us. And this is only applicable within the county jurisdiction, not within the city of Winston-Salem jurisdiction, because the bona fide farm provision is a county-only provision. And of course, that's a remnant from whenever the enabling legislation, you had the city and the county enabling legislation is a different part of the general statutes, but it's still a county-only provision. Anyway, you have how they can qualify, and then it's real clear whenever you are you're a dairy farm, you're a cattle farm, you're growing soybeans. I mean, it's clear when you're doing those activities, you're a farm, you're exempt from zoning regulations, building code regulations, all of those kind of things. Where it continues to become more and more gray is where those lines get blurred with kind of the value-added provisions in the general statutes. And if I'll call attention to the second large paragraph on the stapled handout that I provided. About halfway down, it says, for purposes of this section, agritourism means any activity carried out on a farm or ranch that allows members of the general public for recreational, entertainment, or educational purposes to view or enjoy rural activities, including farming, ranching, historic, cultural, harvest-your-own activities, hunting, fishing, equestrian activities, or natural activities and attractions. And it goes on to say, a building or structure used for agritourism includes any building or structure used for public or private events, including but not limited to weddings, receptions, meetings, demonstrations of farm activities, meals, and other events that are taking place on the farm because of its farm or rural setting. So, you try to interpret that. Generally speaking, we try to fall on the spectrum of kind of the construction behind ordinances, and it's to be construed generally to the benefit of the person making the request. If there's not a specific prohibition, if there's not a specific, hey, how are you? If there's not a specific, something that, that would specifically prohibit something, then, we try to have a broad construction. Now, with that being said, obviously there are limitations, and I'll actually get to one of those in a minute. Kind of even where it gets grayer is, let's say you have something that is on a bona fide farm, it clearly qualifies as a bona fide farm, and they're utilizing a structure that was built for farm activity for the event, such as a wedding, a reception, something like that. Everything about that is exempt from zoning regulation. If you take the same situation and you have a piece of property that qualifies for the bona fide farm exemption, and they choose to build an event center or wedding venue or something on that property, and it's not being built for farm purposes but for the value added provisions, they can do the activity on the site, but then the building has to go through the proper building and zoning permits and construction, inspections, et cetera. So again, there are lots of little nuances and things with this. As you can imagine, and these provisions that allowed the agritourism and kind of the value-added provisions of the statutes they were amended sometime in the mid-2010s. I can't remember the exact date, but as you can imagine, as those regulations were put forth and as folks kind of test the waters and kind of push the envelope, there have been some court cases that have come about, and actually on page 4 of this is a court case that this was put out by NC State University, but it dealt with something that, and the reason why I chose this is it's somewhat similar to the situation we had with the turkey shoot. It never got to that point, but one of the things that was argued in conjunction with our rewrite of the temporary use provisions is that they felt like that they were exempt from zoning regulations anyway because they had a bona fide farm, and they do, and they did. But in this case, it was a case out of Harnett County. They were having a shooting range on the farm, and they got sued by a neighbor, and I don't know if it was the actual county that got sued. I think it was the county that got sued. But essentially, the North Carolina Superior Court and the Court of Appeals held that, a shooting range in and of itself was not a bona fide farm activity. That was something that was being done on a bona fide farm, but it was not a bona fide farm activity. Now, again, to further nuance that, perhaps if they had, had someone on the site hunting, that could be construed as a bona fide farm activity if push comes to shove, because that's one of the things that is mentioned is that hunting is something that can be considered exempt. So again, there are lots of nuances. I really just wanted to introduce this topic because it was a request that came out of the planning board meeting from last month, because we did have the special event center on Peacehaven Road. And of course, if that property had been located a quarter mile further or half mile further to the south in the county zoning, they would not have to go through the rezoning process for the event center. So with that, I kind of just wanted to introduce the topic and just we can have a discussion. If there are questions, I'll just kind of turn it back to the board if there are things that you want to ask, if there are discussion things, if there are specific things that you want discussed that I perhaps didn't cover in the materials that I provided.
Yeah, I made the request, and I apologize. I made the request, and so I don't want to tie up a lot of the board's time with this, but I just wanted, my only question would have been, how does staff, when you get a rezoning request to go from ag to something like RS20, in your mind, do you see that as a down zoning? I know it's not a down zoning from a traffic standpoint, but, from a permitted uses standpoint.
No, and again, it's one of those things that it's kind of hard to nuance. Whenever you're going from ag to like RS20 or RS9, I mean you're either doubling or quadrupling depending on the district the density of housing allowed. Not, just because if you're out in the county, and again, I'm going to concentrate on the county since that's a bona fide farm activity exemption is for county zoning. You don't have to have ag zoning to be ag exempt. If you have RS9 zoning, but you are in the county and you qualify under one of those 4 provisions, you don't have to have ag zoning to qualify under the exemption. So if you're in the county and you're requesting a rezoning from ag to general use RS9, you're intensifying your ability to, in the future, perhaps do a subdivision, but you would not be limiting your ability to do agritourism on your property in the interim.
Okay, that answers it. Thank you.
Just a quick question. I didn't see in any of this offhand, is there an acreage limit, minimum acreage required?
There isn't, as far as what our ordinance says, and I don't believe there's a limit in the general statute. There are some limits related to voluntary ag districts. There are some limits related to, perhaps some of the tax exemptions through the present use value through your local tax office. There used to be, and I don't know whether it was in the statute at one point and it got removed. Every place I had ever been that I've ever worked that had a county component to it used to have a 3-acre minimum. But again, that's not been in the statutes at least for 20 years, but it was always in everyone's ordinance that had this minimum 3-acre threshold. So I'm not sure where that came from, but it is not a statutory requirement for a minimum acreage.
That's what because I've heard a 5-year minimum. I don't know if that was referring to taxes, the tax provision, if that's going to be separate. But if it's not in the general statutes, how could it be different?
Yeah, well, there are some, if you look at the farm, it says a farm sales tax exempt certificate issued by the Department of Revenue, a copy of the property tax listing showing is eligible for the present use value program.
Mr. Murphy, I'm sorry, where are you reading from?
I'm sorry, on page 1 of what's stapled together.
Okay.
And it's also, you can find it on page 3 because this is what we hand out to folks for farm use verification. But that actually provides the reference to how you qualify as a bona fide farm. The other 2 are a copy of the farm owner's operator Schedule F from the owner's federal tax income return, and then being a forestry management program and have a forestry management plan. So those are the 4 ways you qualify. Now, in order, there could be provisions related to the North Carolina Department of Revenue as far as the number of years of tax receipts you have to be able to get that number. But if you provide us one of those 4 things, then you are a bona fide farm.
I had the same question. It seems like there possibly should be a minimum added on to this. Because initially I was thinking when you were giving the RS9 example, I was like, so I could have a RS9 lot in the county and call myself a farm. But we do need do you need 2 of the 4?
Just one.
Just one of the 4.
But again, just keep in mind, one of the reasons why I've never understood the 3-acre provision is our ordinance can't be more restrictive than the state enabling legislation. If the state enabling legislation says you're exempt from zoning if you meet one of these 4 criteria, then we can't have another qualifier. So even though it may make sense that we would want to have a minimum acreage threshold, since they're exempt, if they meet one of these 4 things, we couldn't do that.
Now, one question I didn't read all the fine print yet, but you said hunting is a bona fide activity. So, but what limitations would you have on an ag space for someone who wants to do hunting? Like, I'm thinking like size and, distance to neighboring buildings and things like that.
Well, again, you still would have the provisions in the county code dealing with discharge of firearms adjacent to occupied structures, the same as you had for the timber use of the turkey shoot. Again, if you read that about halfway down in that second large paragraph on the first page of the stapled together handout, again, I'll just read this again. For the purposes of this section, agritourism means any activity carried out on a farm or ranch that allows members of the general public for recreational, entertainment, or educational purposes to view or enjoy rural activities, including farming, ranching, historic, cultural, harvest-year-round activities, hunting, fishing, equestrian activities, or natural activities and attractions. It doesn't provide any guidance. I mean, again, if you would qualify under the Bonafide farm exemption on any piece of property that met these requirements, but, again, I don't think you could hunt and not be subject to the zoning regulations, but I don't know that you could discharge a firearm any closer than what the county code allows, because that's separate and apart from zoning. That's a county code regulation. And again, that's what I'm saying. All this stuff is very nuanced. And at the end of the day, the most important thing to remember is that the General Assembly constructed this to allow farmers, and again, they probably had one intent whenever it was written, but of course, people know that if they meet one of these four things, they're a farmer, but it was generally meant to allow for supplemental income for farmers so they wouldn't have to sell their property for development. But again, just like anything else, folks are going to find ways to do things if they qualify, and that's what we have seen. Again, no one is doing anything what I would call untowards. I mean, they're taking advantage of the regulations as they're written, and as long as they're in compliance with those regulations, things are okay. And now, one could argue whether or not the regulations are too broad. I think lots of folks would probably say that they are, but again, they're not doing anything that would be considered illegal. I know Melinda's has a question.
I had a couple questions. One just is fireworks, like if they want to have a hot fireworks display at certain times of the year, would that be considered a bona fide farm activity?
No, and again, it gets back to the same question related to, like firearms. I would still say, there's a prohibition against doing fireworks unless you go through the proper, again, I don't know who you go through to get the permits, or whether it's ATF. I have no idea. I've never tried to get a fireworks permit. There are, like for the, as a general rule, fireworks in the state of North Carolina are outlawed. But, for the fair, they get a fireworks permit where they can set off fireworks every night. For, at the end of, maybe Wake Forest football game, it's been years since I've been there. I don't know whether they set off fireworks, but again, you can get permits to do those things. If someone had was able to go through the process and qualified and could get a permit, then yes, but just setting off fireworks because it's the 4th of July or New Year's Eve without the proper permits, they could not do that.
Okay, and this is a little bit unrelated to the county use of, but I was wondering, in the city, there are some single-family residences that have basically a farm use on them, where they have big greenhouses. How do you get approval for that use?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to pull up, because I didn't anticipate that question, but that can be easily answered. There are things in the ordinance that do allow for that. If you'll just bear with me just a second, let me pull the ordinance up. It's under the, let me scroll to it and I'll go. Under the accessory use provisions, under other accessory uses in the UDO, there's a city permit, and of course, again, just like everything else, it's kind of nuanced. I mean, you can have if you want to have a greenhouse on your property, you would have to go through the process to get permits. You wouldn't be exempt for that. So you'd have to go in and get an accessory structure permit, meet whatever applicable setbacks based on the size, the square foot. You couldn't go over, you couldn't exceed, your maximum square footage of allowed accessory structures. So you'd have to get a permit for that. There is a provision in the ordinance that allows, even within the city, it says sale of agricultural products grown on the premises. And that's under a permitted accessory uses. It says the sale of agricultural products grown on the premises is a permitted accessory use. So let's say, you have a lot in whatever subdivision you live in. Let's say you have an ample-sized backyard, you could do it, or you have a vacant lot beside of you that you own. You could grow corn, potatoes, and beans, whatever you wanted to, and sell that on your property. You could take it to the farmer's market. You could do whatever you wanted to there. So again, there are some already things in the ordinance that even allow that for within the city. The difference being it's not the ag exemption. So you'd have to get the permits. You would have to meet the requirements in the ordinance, but that's permitted.
All right, thanks.
Are there any additional questions or comments?
I'll just say here for fresh strawberries.
Pick your own or go buy a flat, either one, right? All right. If there are no further questions on that item, we can move into what I would probably call the marquee item of the day. And with that, I'm going to, after I introduce it, I'll turn it over to Amy. For those who are, Kirk is on his way back. He had to present to something at the chamber that should be wrapping up around 5, so hopefully he'll be coming in as well. But item number 4 is just kind of an update and kind of an overview of the next steps in our comprehensive plan. For those that don't know, our comprehensive plan, we have landed on a name, and it will be called Forward 2045. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amy, and we're just going to watch a couple quick videos, just make sure folks, of our planning board members, I believe we only have 2 planning board members that are on the board that were here when we did Legacy 2030. So just want to give a quick overview of kind of what comp plans are, and then Amy's going to give a presentation where we can kind of let folks know what we have done up to date, and then kind of what our next steps will be. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amy.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So
Good
we're going to
afternoon.
start with the first video. It is just shy of 10 minutes, so.
From Gokche Capital. Now before I begin, be sure to click subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Major Pierre-Charles L'Enfant was a visionary, one of the most influential architects and planners in the newly formed United States, highly sought after by the most powerful men in the country. That was until he lost perhaps the greatest architectural commission in the history of the country. But more on that later. For first, we are going to cover everything you need to know about a jurisdiction's comprehensive plan and why it is important to you as a landowner or buyer. Number 1, a comprehensive plan, also called a general plan, master plan, or land use plan, is a document designed to guide the future actions of a community as it grows. It explains a future vision with long-term goals and objectives for all activities that affect the local government. As such, a comprehensive plan is developed by a local unit of government, whether that's your city, town, or county. Number 2, a comprehensive plan serves a number of functions. It provides continuity to the community over time. It also balances the competing interests of various residents and businesses. It protects investments by, say, making sure a newly installed sewer line is not torn up 10 years later when the government decides to create a new public building over the same location. It plans development in a way that protects valued resources. This is another way of saying it balances the goal of growth and development with the protection of things that are important to the community, such as open space. It promotes economic development primarily by creating plans for new construction, expansion, and growth. And it allows citizens to express a collective vision of their community. Number 3, master planning has a long history in the United States and has been around since the earliest days of the country. Which brings us back to Major Pierre Charles L'Enfant. In September 1789, the Major had written to Washington offering his services for the master plan of the new federal capital, an offer that Washington accepted a year later. And L'Enfant embarked on an ambitious plan to transform a sleepy section of swampland into a magnificent new capital, creating one of the first and most famous examples of a city master plan. Shown here is that plan for Washington, D.C. But then L'Enfant tore down the home of his boss's nephew and ruined everything. Although we'll get to that at the end of this video. For now, we have a few more things you should know about comprehensive plans. Number 4, a comprehensive plan will generally have 6 basic characteristics. It's comprehensive, thus the name, which is another way of saying it is complete. It is long-term, usually having a vision that is at least 10 to 20 years out. It's general, so it encompasses the entire community. It is focused primarily on physical development. If we think back to L'Enfant's plan for DC, that was primarily about developing buildings. So in this way, the comprehensive plan ultimately relates to physical design proposals. Number 5, every jurisdiction has a slightly different comprehensive planning process, but there are some overarching guidelines that most areas will follow. First, there should only be one official comprehensive plan at a time. The comprehensive plan should also be formally adopted by the legislative body. There should be a period of public debate prior to the plan's adoption. In a similar vein, the plan should be easily understandable and available to the public. Number 6. Again, every jurisdiction has a slightly different process for creating a comprehensive plan, but at a high level, the planning process looks something like this. The local government will create a committee that is in charge of overseeing the creation or amendment of the comprehensive plan. This committee will then go about collecting data on the existing conditions of the town or county. This data is analyzed, and goals and recommendations are created based on what the data shows. So for example, if the data shows that the housing stock is not keeping up with demand, then the comprehensive plan will likely have a large section about how to increase the number of housing units available. After goals and recommendations are created, the committee will oversee a series of forums, meetings, and surveys designed to engage the public and get citizen feedback, at which point this feedback is incorporated and the final plan is created. Number 7, and the final plan usually has at least the following components: a section on land use intentions in the jurisdiction, a plan to meet the community's housing needs, a plan for how people and goods will be appropriately moved around the town, or put more plainly, this is the section that deals with roads and public transportation, a plan for expansion and improvement of public infrastructure, facilities, and utilities, a discussion on both the short and long-term implementation strategies, and a plan for the protection of natural and historic resources. Number 8. Now, despite what you may think, having heard of how much goes into the creation of a comprehensive plan, in most areas, a comprehensive plan is not actually legally binding. To be implemented, the goals in the comprehensive plan have to be incorporated into a community's ordinances. For example, the zoning ordinance or capital improvement plan. And one of the most important things to understand about comprehensive or master plans is that they are not the same as the zoning ordinance. So as a landowner, one of the most important ways in which you will interact with a comprehensive plan is around land use regulations that govern your property. Now, the actual land use regulations that affect your property are going to be laid out in the zoning ordinance. But the zoning ordinance is designed to implement the comprehensive plan. So ultimately, you will want to look to the comprehensive plan to understand what the jurisdiction's land use intentions are for your property. And finally, this leads us to number 9. If all of this sounds a bit esoteric to you, keep in mind that as a landowner, you will want to engage in your jurisdiction's planning process. This is because, as we just mentioned, the comprehensive plan's land use goals for your property are going to affect what you can do on your land once they have been implemented in the zoning ordinance. Thus, whenever there is a new community planning process going on, you should be involved so you can make sure that the land use goals are in tune with how you want to use the land. But let's go back to L'Enfant's plan for DC. Like most visionaries, Pierre L'Enfant was a man with perhaps a slight case of megalomania, believing his grand vision held higher authority than the mere mortals who had commissioned it. Unfortunately for L'Enfant, while Washington may have been one of those most rare of clients as committed to an architectural vision as the architect, Washington was not L'Enfant's boss. Oversight of the planning and construction of the federal capital had been placed in the hands of 3 commissioners, men who were perhaps more concerned with appeasing the district's wealthy landowners and keeping costs down than architectural excellence. From the get-go, L'Enfant would frequently go over their heads, speaking directly to the president. And one day, Washington received an angry letter from a Daniel Carroll, nephew to one of the 3 commissioners. According to Carroll, L'Enfant had begun demolishing his home, having already succeeded in entirely destroying the roof and most of the upper story. Washington immediately wrote to L'Enfant, pleading with him to show some prudence, but L'Enfant continued all the same, although he did make one concession. He sent a note to Carroll asking him if he would prefer to destroy his home himself. Incensed, the commissioners threatened to resign unless Washington got L'Enfant under control. L'Enfant, in turn, threatened to resign rather than subordinate himself, and to his surprise, Washington accepted. Upon L'Enfant's departure, Carroll's home was rebuilt, albeit a few lots over, and construction of the full plan was never completed. Yet L'Enfant's vision would outlast him, Washington, and the commissioners. For in 1901, the Senate, embarrassed at the decrepit state of the Capitol, commissioned a team of architects and planners to complete the Capitol plan, largely based on L'Enfant's original design, which highlights perhaps the defining characteristic of master plans, their ability to endure when the vision they express is compelling enough. All the more reason for you to engage in your own community's planning process. But do you have any stories about comprehensive or master plans? Let us know in the comments. Did you like this video? You're going to love our Gokche Land Due Diligence program. We'll make you a land due diligence expert in just 7 days. Check it out at gokchecapital.com/glad. And while
All right. And the second one is only a little less than 5 minutes. So.
A comprehensive plan is a tool that many cities use to establish a high-level vision to guide policy decisions.
Let me see if I can get this to be a little bit more.
Over several years.
One of the most important tools the city has to be able to get input and feedback for long-range planning is our comprehensive plan. The ability of people to provide information and give us direction and vision on what they want their community to look like helps us be able to put policies and procedures in place to help make those visions become reality.
The city's current comprehensive plan was adopted in 2003.
Since its adoption, the city has made significant progress in implementing many of the plan's goals and strategies. Asheville has attracted significant employers as it continues to support local businesses. Revitalization efforts and zoning code and design guidelines have been implemented in areas such as Haywood Road, the River Arts District, downtown, Biltmore Village, and Biltmore Park Town Square. The city's multimodal approach to Asheville. Numerous opportunities were provided to engage the community and gather input, including traditional methods such as a public survey, topical focus groups, large public workshops, and small-scale neighborhood meetings. More non-traditional methods included keypad polling, whiteboard out.
It's our opportunity.
She's going to do a quick PowerPoint to kind of let you know what we've been doing. We'll send both of these videos out via email. I know that one, I think probably you could get the gist.
One predetermined either national, state, or local example, underrepresented communities, the arts, anything creative that we could sort of pull from and get ideas. List. You can see the state selected ones. Those are 6 states, communities that we
typically look at as our peer communities within the state. Looking regionally, also, we usually always look at Greenville and Chattanooga, Richmond as sort of our peers on a regional basis. And then on the national level, we looked at communities such as Portland, which are known for their planning efforts. We looked at Minneapolis because it had a really interesting approach to housing and some of their housing needs. And then also we looked at some of the Daniel Burnham Award winners over the past several years, so the national award-winning plans. And these are the communities that staff selected on their own, and there was a broad range as to reasons why these were chosen. Either this is, areas that we're from, areas that they visited, communities that they were interested in, communities that were in the news at the time, so they wanted to see what they were saying, or simply they just did a Google search of 2018 comprehensive plans and one popped up and they went with it. So it was a really broad range of different types of plans there. And so what we learned, 3 main points that we learned was, first and foremost, we do not want to have a massive document. As an example, Minneapolis's plan is 1,200 pages long. 800 of it is the appendix, but that's still a 400-page document, which is way, way too much. So we were aiming for about a 100-page document. And this is absolutely doable. Denver's is only like 78 or something like that pages, so it is absolutely doable to do a document of that length. To use good, vibrant colors with good graphics and good pictures, really bringing people in, one, to catch the eye and to almost use it as a marketing tool, but also to look at it as a way to navigate the plan. A lot of communities use color as a way to say, if you're looking at a chapter with pink headings, you're talking about economic development. If you're looking at green, it's sustainability. So you can kind of navigate through the plan and where you are in the plan. And then lastly, clear and concise language. Not wordy or not a lot of planner speech. We really want folks to be able to pick up the document and understand that they don't need to have a master's in planning. Anyone can read it, understand what the vision is that we are proposing. Some other things that we learned through this are sort of main topics that we want to consider. The first and foremost being equity. A lot of communities that talked about equity, they either had 2 approaches. They had a blanket equity statement in the beginning, and that was basically it. Or they had it sort of interwoven throughout the entire document, from having the blanket statement in the beginning, to having policy items and goals and objectives related around equity, to even going so far as the pictures that they chose to use within the document to really show the breadth of the community. And then obviously affordability and housing, that's a key issue that we are facing right now. So obviously we would include those in our document. Resiliency and adaptability, obviously we are coming out of a pandemic, which is going to completely change how we move forward, both from economically, you look at office space, to how we look at folks moving here and what kind of they're looking for in terms of amenities now, the role of open space, the role of retail and how that's going to change, as well as being able to adapt to the changing technologies that are coming about. I mean, a simple example would be, I don't think anyone thought scooters would be a mode of transportation in 2012 when we did the plan then, but now, that's all changing. That changes pretty much every other year. That's something new is coming on the market. So how can we be adaptable to all these changing factors? Logistics for economic development, making sure that we are putting ourselves in a position to really have good economic development, whether that's from encouraging our universities to being entrepreneurs, to having the transportation network in place, or whatever framework needs to be in place to make ourselves attractive for economic development. And then accessibility, livability, and sustainability all sort of tie into the same thing. We want to make sure that we are being accessible to all individuals, no matter their abilities, or physical abilities, or their age, or socioeconomic class, but also thinking things like the digital divide and how that impacts the community and approach, making sure we have amenities that folks want and will make us an attractive place to live, that people will stay here and really be part of the community and invest in the community. Also, sustainability, climate change, we have to deal with that and the ramifications of that. Tourism was one that came up a bunch, and really looking at how can we position ourselves to be a destination and how can we build off that. And then looking at our current history, we focus a lot on the Moravians and R.J. Reynolds and all that. There's a lot of history out there talked about that, but we don't really focus on the post-World War II history. And we really want to bring that into the 5 to 6 top projects, either as part of their objectives or as part of their implementation strategy, and that worked really well for those documents. A couple communities also incorporated quotes that they received during the community outreach to really personalize the document and really show that this was a people's document, not us planners going in a back room somewhere and coming up with this, that we really heard the citizens, and so they pulled quotes from that. And then pop-up boxes to really add additional information or examples or success stories about some of the objectives or priorities that are being spoken about, to provide just a little bit extra information without being very verbose up with it. And Chris sort of took my thunder. Again, the name is Forward 2045.
Great name, by the way.
And how did we come up with this name? So we asked staff for their suggestions, and we got about over 50 name suggestions, just ran the gamut of different types of words. And then we had staff rank those to determine a top 10. And then we consulted with Marketing and Communications Department to say, do you have any thoughts on these? Did we miss anything that would really work? And they liked Forward because it's an action. We're moving forward, so they really like that. And we kept it just Forward instead of Forward Forsyth Winston-Salem, just because it flows a little bit better.
Amy, were there some really bad ones that you could share with us? Some giggles here and some levity?
I don't know if we had any really bad ones, but you could definitely tell folks basically just went with the source and was like, here's every word that means this and all the other ones. And so there was some of them that, I don't think any of them were really
I don't think any of them were bad, but there were some, we had Vision 2005, which was done in the late 80s, early 90s. We had Legacy done around the 80s, early 90s. We had Legacy done around the turn of the 60s.
1,000 people go, well, where did they go? And what does that mean for our community? Essentially, we're seeing what changes has happened in terms of demographics, in terms of development and housing, immigration, outmigration, all of that, looking at those sorts of things. And then doing some topic research, some in-depth topic research based off those topics I mentioned earlier. And then also looking at our public outreach plan. We do have a stakeholder list that we've already created and has over 150 potential stakeholders to be contacted. And this is, development community, talking about accessibility, talking about underrepresented communities, leadership, the full gamut.
And on that, I will,
We're talking about downtown's cool, but it's really difficult for them to get around on sidewalks. But I think they probably be, if it's not on your list, IFB, to know about the needs of those who are blind.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have, so we have the stakeholder list, but we also need to look at creative outreach efforts. In 2012, we had the music video. I jokingly say, I wonder who's on our staff is the new TikTok star, because it's all about the TikTok and how to get the younger generation into this process and get them engaged. So we'll have to think creatively of how we get a broad swath of people engaged in this. Obviously, we'll have a website with information, and we'll do surveys as well. We'll look at having a logo and some marketing items, swag to give out to sort of help entice people to come and participate. We plan to do public outreach starting in the fall. And then we are anticipating an 18 to 24-month process with adoption winter 2023, spring 2024, somewhere in that realm.
One of the things I would say that's important regarding the website development is, again, if you look at our, one of the things that we found is effective is trying to have that shorter plan, not be verbose. Make sure we cover the salient things, but some of the plans that we saw that we liked, the plans were small, but they had a good website presence that continued to exist after the plan, that housed some of the background information behind the plan. It kept the plan fresh. the plan didn't get embedded in the overall website. It was an ability to continue to let that website breathe. So, I mean, again, we don't know that's definitively what we're going to do, but I think it would be good to probably come up with something and then, kind of archive and house our overall comp plan process on that website.
Yeah, and if you work on any websites or anything that you say, this layout looked really good or this format worked really well.
Taking over the ability to, lay that document out, and, it works well on a phone, iPad. So, yeah, we'll definitely have to make sure that's something that we keep in mind moving forward.
Just strictly for the sake of humor, I have recently had the need to replace a lost North Carolina driver's license. And the North Carolina DMV website gets you right to ordering a replacement license, lickety-split. You enter your personal information, and then the first qualifying question is, enter your license number.
Well, you don't know yours by heart, I do.
Likewise.
So, I mean, it's way down the road, but the comment, and maybe there's a way to integrate this in the website too, but the comment about the actual plan using color coding, I think is fantastic. I mean, I had never really thought about that, but when you think about things like that you review that tie a color to a particular topic or whatever, it does make it easier when you're flipping back through it.
Unless you're colorblind.
Well, yeah, I was going to say right here.
Yeah,
so
I mean, I guess there's.
So find a backup.
So maybe some icons that go with the colors, like a tree for environmental stuff that's green.
Amy, I have a question about the public outreach. If I recall from Legacy 2001, there was a committee, and I think your video also referenced a committee to oversee the process. There was also focus groups that involved quite a few people. Wondering if that's part of the outreach plan. And just as a comment, from my experience of being involved in a lot of planning processes as just a member of the public, I have found it valuable when there is a longer term process than just recruitment to a single meeting. Because when you go to a single meeting, there is a superficiality about the level of depth that you can get into some of those issues. So I do see the value, at least for part of this process, to have some kind of longer-term involvement of people who want to be more involved so that the citizens of the community can really dig into the issues in a deeper way. So just wondering what you're thinking along those lines.
Regarding a steering committee, our thoughts is that this board would be the steering committee. And then we could easily do stakeholder group meetings with potential groups talking about a specific topic area to get their input directly on, let's say, accessibility, for example. So you would have, Centers for the Blind, Bike Patrol, different, Winston-Salem Greenways group, to different types of groups to strictly focus on that one particular area. That's one we could work on as well as looking at different options for just gathering input. So maybe it's a combination of pop-up events at multiple locations throughout the community. So you're not just trying to do downtown, but you're going to different places where people are, instead of assuming that they will come to you, you go to them. And also having multiple meetings at different places, at different times, different days, just because trying to make it as easy as possible for folks to come and participate and share their input. I agree, having that one meeting, if you can't make that one meeting, then, for whatever reason, it's very much a deterrent.
Yeah, I don't just mean one meeting in that sense. I mean one meeting in the sense of if there is a continuity between in the participation of individuals, as individuals get together and talk about an issue like, let's say, equity, and come to solutions together, that process takes more than one meeting.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm saying that for that kind of engagement, if you really want deeper engagement in the community, you need a continuity of meetings in a process rather than just each individual being exposed to just one tiny aspect of it. Because I know that, I assume that there are people who would want to be more deeply involved, which is what happened in Legacy. I mean, there were committees that met for months.
Amy, if I could just add a little more perspective to that. Melinda, you're absolutely right. With the first Legacy, we did have a committee structure, and that's how we started off our area plans as well. And what made us kind of go away from that with Legacy 2030 and kind of subsequent processes is, Clarence, you may be looking around, the only board member that can remember who was on the board when we did the South Suburban Plan and the West Suburban Plan around 2010 and that time frame. And what happened is there were some contentious recommendations that the steering committees made in those area plans, and citizens would feel like they were basically dealing with almost an empowered subunit of government trying to get their points across. And Paul Norby at the time really felt like, if we want to make this a transparent and equitable process, let's take out that middleman, for lack of a more eloquent term, and really give everyone the same voice in the process. Now, that being said, I think, as Amy said, the planning board as a whole could be the steering committee, or you all as a board could kind of set up a steering committee that might meet with staff on a semi-regular basis to keep tabs on the plan. That's certainly something that some of our other city boards and commissions have done for their long-range documents. So just wanted to provide a little more clarification as to how we came to that decision.
I really like the concept of having this as the steering committee, but maybe with some supplemental, lift capacity, some folks that really have some expertise or interest in a particular area. But I do think that this is so important. I'm so happy we got away from Legacy, and hey, I like Legacy, that's great. But we've had, if you read the newspaper, we have had at least $500 million of what I would call foreign capital, non-triad-based capital come into this area in this past 18 months. And that is truly a game changer with respect to, what can happen in this area and in this forward thing. I mean, I think, looking to the future and really, well, anyway, there's two different topics, but I think it'll take a lot of extra time for this board. I think this is really an important piece of work that we'd be doing. So I think that if we are the steering committee, I think that we all need to be prepared for some supplemental meetings, some additional meetings.
I would hope it's also of additional value to note that the actual calendar date of 2045 doesn't mean that upon the adoption of the comprehensive plan in 2023, that it doesn't undergo regular, annual, or with some frequency updates. It's a fluid living document, just like the city itself is. And I think that's one of the greatest messages to communicate to everyone, because surely someone's going to move to Winston-Salem that's really interested the week this thing is supposed to be adopted and feel left out, and they should not. But you've got to go on with your process. So I think it'll be great for us to be sure to emphasize the living nature of this.
And Jack, if I could, you bring up a great point that, again, I think this board recognizes this, but that's always been our philosophy, is to use the tools like our corridor plans and interchange plans and area plans. These are the things where we can keep fleshing out those policies, and we have plenty of those documents that contradict things that were said in Legacy or the Legacy update. So I just wanted to echo that staff is 100% behind that philosophy.
And if I can just respond to what you said about the committee process. I still feel that there needs to be a deeper level of public involvement. I don't see it happening if we have individual meetings that people just go to once and write something down on a note, stick it down there, and then you have a bunch of comments. You don't really know what to do with that. I mean, if you really want to see what do people want on the issue of affordability, on the issue of housing, there needs to be a deeper discussion. And so, it doesn't have to be in the form of a committee with a committee group that makes decisions, but in the form of meetings where you're getting give and take and dialogue, and there's a process by which something comes out of that. This is the consensus of the group, just, to the greatest, degree possible that you understand what those main issues are. But just one meeting where you talk about the issues and get a lot of comments, I mean, you can do anything you want with that. It's not a true reflection of the public's thought process.
I think that point's well taken, Melinda. And when Amy and Chris and I have had conversations about this, and certainly Aaron prior to that, we're seeing kind of a revamping of the way that we've done public outreach in the past as part of this process. So rather than, like in the past, we would have one meeting might be, let's talk about all the land use recommendations. That's kind of compartmentalized off. Then the next meeting, let's do transportation. And you're right, with that process, there wasn't as much of an ability to kind of keep the dialogue going and let those issues be mulled over and refined. Some of the communities that Amy kind of profiled for you, we saw that given the breadth and depth of outreach tools that they've used, things such as, websites where you can leave comments in public and pop-up events and surveys and all these different tools, we're going to want to be approaching these problems at different times with different groups and kind of making the results of those feedback gathering missions public. And if that makes any sense, is rather than kind of doing this on everything's cordoned off and check that box, let's move on to the next issue, check that box. It's going to be more fluid and iterative, as Chris was also alluding to.
And if I could just elaborate, I mean, again, we're in the infancy of this. I think this, I know a couple folks have already left, and I believe that some other folks need to leave here shortly. I mean, I think this is one of those, as the chair leaves, I believe this is one of those things where I believe more than likely we probably need to continue this discussion in May, at the May work session. Nothing is set in stone at this point, but it's one of those things where I think we have to look at balancing several different things. We have to look at trying to kind of thread that needle as far as, trying to find what's best for the overall community through whatever process we choose. But we also have to, look at our internal work program and the capacity that a comp plan and working on that draws down from our staff. It's kind of an all hands on deck approach. So, our work program that we're also going to bring to you, I believe a draft at your May work session, is a little light on new projects just because of the things we're doing, we're going to be doing for the comp plan over the next year. So, I think there's some good points here. I think there's some things that we can go back and perhaps do a little additional research before we come back in May, as far as some things we can bring forward. But I did just want to let you know, I mean, again, nothing at this point is set in stone. Just these are some of our thoughts and some of our overarching themes that we've kind of found and some of the goals that we want to achieve, but we haven't come up with how we're going to do anything at this point.
Yeah. And I'll just add as well, one of the things, at least for me, that I want to incorporate is being able to have some flexibility, as we move through the process. If you can take a step back and say, we're not getting input from this area of town or this segment of the population or what have you, then we can switch our approach and do some different targeted approaches to try to make sure that we are getting input from whichever group that may be that we feel like we're not, so that we can build in some flexibility and some fluidity in how we approach it. So if we have to sort of take a step back, reapproach, try some new method to try to get that input, to make sure we are getting a broad spectrum of input from everyone, and they are really fleshing out those details, and so that people do feel like they contributed to the plan and that their voice has been heard.
I did want to just add real quickly, so I don't forget before May. I understand what Melinda's saying. So something that comes to mind for me would be that, so you have your meetings, and then, you know, if everybody's signed in and whatnot, maybe there's a bounce out emails like afterwards. If you have continuous thoughts or you've mulled it over, please share them through the website or, you know, something like that. Or even it could be a meetup, a casual type of thing, like meet at a coffee house to discuss it more with your neighbors, you know, and maybe that allows people the opportunity to talk it out with others, and, you know, something that's not like overly, you know, work for you all, but maybe just 1 or 2 planners are there and can kind of just have discussion with people so people feel comfortable. Also, because I understand what you said, you don't want people to feel like we are the committee, this is our plan, where versus it is everybody's plan. It kind of allows people to be comfortable, to feel like they have been heard. There's different ways, like you're saying, you know, in the iterative, and you can change it as it goes, but maybe some things to think about.
If I could, and then if there aren't any more questions or comments related to this, I would just say we'll continue this discussion at your May work session. I would throw one other piece of information or cautionary tale, or who the heck knows. But I mean, again, you know, one of the reasons, you know, there were 2 reasons why we've kind of been on hold the last 8 to 10 months, and one was, you know, Aaron transitioned into the manager's office and making sure that whoever the new planning director was had input into this, and that was made. And the other thing was COVID, and of course, as we all have seen in the paper and the news the last week, you know, we're going through another COVID uptick. So, you know, again, I think, you know, if I'm realistic, I think we're always going to be dealing with COVID. I think it's going to become like the flu or something else. I don't know. But, you know, that's something that we're also have to take into consideration, you know, if this variant is, you know, more potent than past variants and it's contagious, you know, how are we going to do the plan? Because I don't think we can put the plan on hold indefinitely while we wait for COVID to go away, because again, I don't think it's ever going to go away. So how do we deal with that? So I just want to make sure I mentioned that kind of as the closing point of this. With that, like I said, we'll bring that back as a discussion topic at work session in May. Under item 5, debriefing of the public meeting of the 14th, did anyone have anything to discuss from that meeting?
Yeah, just briefly, on the issue of the event center, just wanted to express my view that I hope that this does not become a precedent, changing RS9 to RS20 for the purpose of allowing an event center. I think that is problematic because under the ordinance, RS9 is not considered an acceptable density for an event center. And so to just get around that by changing the zoning, I think is problematic if we use that as a precedent. I mean, we already have something similar where churches are kind of changing their zoning so they can get electronic signs. So I see that as kind of a similar potential danger if we allowed that to happen.
And I think that's a fair point. And I think the only thing I would say in answer to that is, you know, again, just with anything, you have to look at in the context of what the request is and, you know, kind of the situation. If you look at that property, you know, again, if we go back to 2004, it would have been in the county and it would have been ag exempt anyway. And that's kind of how the property's been used over the course of time. It's a large acreage tract that is probably more closely aligned with ag than it is RS9. So in that context, I certainly appreciate where you're coming from. But I think we have to evaluate them all individually. If we had someone, with maybe a 2-acre tract that was RS9 and they wanted to rezone it to RS20 for a special event center, again, I think we would probably look at that a little differently than this large acre tract. But I definitely think that is something that we need to be cognizant of moving forward. Other items? Or if not, under staff report, just a couple of things. At your place, you have a copy of the development dashboard for Q1. We'll probably, I'll just kind of let you digest that, look over if you have any questions. Just quickly, our first quarter non-residential construction permit value shattered the previous record by a lot. The previous record high for non-residential for a quarter was 156 million, and we're like 308 million. So again, we continue to do a lot of permit activity. You can see also in there we have done a lot of residential. So again, just kind of digest that. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Kirk or Steve. Your May planning board meeting, just keep in mind that we have a fairly large agenda. One of those cases on the agenda will be a case in the county, the Riverwalk Project that you may have seen covered on the news south of Tanglewood. At this point, it has not been continued. We were thinking they may continue it a month to work on a couple of things. They have decided to move forward with the proposal. Their revised plan has been submitted. We're actually going to meet as a staff tomorrow to sit down and look at that and see what changes they have incorporated into their plan. But again, so I imagine that will have heavy public citizen interest. So I imagine there'll be a number of folks here for that public hearing. The other items, I don't know of a lot of anything else that's controversial, but I do believe there are at least 8 to 10, maybe 12 items on the agenda. So prepare May to be a little long. As the HRC chair mentioned earlier, don't forget we do have a marker unveiling for the St. Phillips at 3 o'clock on Saturday, and the location is actually over in Winston-Salem in front of Carolina University, because that's the location of where the original St. Phillips congregation met. And then I've already mentioned for the work session in May, again, we'll have a continuation of this comp plan discussion so we can have a little more discussion about, structure and how we'd like things done. We'll also provide you with a copy of the draft work program. I'll be meeting, Kirk and myself will be meeting with city and county management staff between now and your work session in May to kind of discuss that, see if there's anything that they want to tweak. But we'll have that discussion at your work session in May. Typically, if there aren't any changes that you would like to see, sometimes you adopt it then, sometimes you want to digest it and come back and adopt it at either your June public hearing meeting or the June work session. So again, we can kind of be fluid there, but that's kind of what's coming up as far as on work session, and that's all I have as far as staff report. Kirk, Amy, do y'all have anything?
I don't have anything to add, except that we will make sure we send you the work program in advance of the meeting. So if there's any questions you all have individually that you think the rest of the group may not be as interested in, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'll be glad to get you more information.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order?
And I would just like to ask if we should expect to be seeing at some point in time any proposed ordinance changes in response to the recent fire and the storage of chemicals?
That's a good question. There hasn't been any specific recommendation to come out of the Winston Weaver subcommittee, which actually is the Public Works Committee. Staff did present to that committee earlier this month as far as what our findings are with our current ordinance, some of the research we had done to our peer communities in North Carolina, and then looking at some large fertilizer operations out in the West and Midwest. The committee is going to be hearing from August Vernon with Emergency Management and from Minor Burnett with Forsyth County Environmental Health at their work session in May. And then in their work session in June, we're going to be taking back to them some potential language that, if they so desire, would ask us to draft. And yes, you would eventually see that more than likely sometime this summer into the fall. The one thing that we cautioned the committee on, and that we discussed as a staff when we met, we discussed it with Aaron earlier this week, is, obviously with Winston Weaver, that plant was built in 1939 and was developed under probably no building code and no fire code. And so there weren't really any building code regulations that had fire prevention measures. There were no fire and building code regulations that dealt with how the chemical was stored, the quantities of material stored, and those kind of things. So as we're preparing a potential ordinance, it's important for us to try to balance land use considerations with building and fire code regulations that may also allay some of those concerns and some of those risks. In other words, they had over 600 tons of ammonium nitrate on that site, just out there in open storage, in rail cars. Under today's regulations, I don't know that they would be able to do that. I don't know if there would be limitations on the amount of materials that could be stored at any one time under fire code regulations. Those are some of the things we're trying to find out. Certainly, whether it's 200 tons or 600 tons, that's still a very dangerous situation. So, I would imagine that any potential land use regulations we would come up with would have some minimum acreages, some enhanced setbacks from property lines, perhaps some distance separations from RS and RM zoning, and some of those things. So, just kind of be on the lookout, but I would not anticipate anything coming to this board until sometime this summer. And of course, we would bring that to you at a work session to get input before we bring it to a public hearing. So just kind of stay tuned. Thank you.
Okay, that's all. I guess we're adjourned.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Very much, Melinda.